What's going on, guys? Super Insane 18 here, and today we are going to be talking about the top 5 best meta decks for the March 2023 format. Now, typically when I make these videos, I give you the top 5 based on my personal opinion of the current format and what I think is the best decks, but we are actually going to do things a little bit differently today. I ran some numbers and got some statistics, so this top 5 is made up entirely of the statistics that I were able to find. Now, in order to determine what is meta, we have to go by two main metrics. That is the total number of plays and the win percentage out of those total number of plays. Now, the reason that's important is because you could have a deck with 100% win rate, but it could have only been played by one person once, and just because they won, that doesn't make that deck meta. The meta is the overall arcing sum of what everybody is playing, and of those decks, what is doing the best. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump on in. Now, based on those statistics, coming in at number 5, we have Trap Tricks with just over 8,000 total plays and a 50% win rate. This is the 5th best deck of the current format. Personally, I would have placed this much higher on the list in my standings, but the numbers are what the numbers are, and the reason that this deck is so incredibly strong is because of just how insane 3 structure decks can be. On the screen right now, we're going to go ahead and take a look at Pack's list. This is just using the 3 structure decks. There is no outside cards in this list at all. Everything here can be obtained by just purchasing 3 copies of the Trap Trick structure deck, and with this, you are able to beat some of the meta contenders. The fact that somebody who's spent maybe $1,000 or more on their deck can fold to 3 structure decks is an absolutely insane concept. But not just that, taking a look at some other builds, this one now is my personal build, using outside cards for additional help. By adding in things that are not included in the structure deck, you can just go ahead and raise the ceiling that much more. And there is a third variant as well. The one that I'm putting on screen now is going to be the Therion version. With cards like Spriggan's Merrymaker and Gigantic Sargus, you are able to search your way into a copy of Lilyboria, which is a plant. Some of the Trap Tricks monsters are plants, so you'll be able to summon it, search your field spell, the Discoliseum. Discoliseum will then get a Regulus, and now on top of all of your traps, as well as your Rafflesia, your Time Thief Redoer, and other Floodgate cards like those, you add an Omni Negate with the Regulus as well, so the ceiling for Trap Tricks feels like it's almost infinite. Again, personally, I would have placed it much higher than our 5th slot, but again, these are what the numbers show, so that is the 5th best deck of this format. Now, coming in at number 4 with just under 9,000 total plays with a 51% win rate, that is going to be Sprite. Now, when I did my personal list, this was actually number 4 as well, and this previously was my number 1 on a lot of lists, or my number 2, I believe it was behind Tearlament. But with Elf being banned on the most recent Forbidden and Limited list, this deck took a massive hit. So the list that you're seeing on screen now is a first place regional pure Sprite, or Nimble Sprite, whatever you want to refer to it as. You can still play decks like this, and you can still make cards like Totally Awesome by abusing the Bujinki link, but we're going to go ahead and show you some other builds as well. On screen now we have a top 16 Runic Sprite deck that was from the Las Vegas YCS, and the fact that you were able to pilot this up to top 16 in a room of 1,000 or more players definitely shows that even without Elf, this deck is something to be reckoned with. And for the third and final build for Sprite, we're going to go ahead and show you guys what is possibly the best variant of Sprite moving forward, and that is going to be Live Twin Sprite. This is a top 4 list from the same Las Vegas YCS, and by top 8, this was the only Sprite deck that was still left in the tournament, so that really shows what kind of variances you can have with playing a Sprite deck. The strategy is still very strong. Me personally, I prefer the pure or the nimble build, just because that kind of fits my playstyle more, but you can also do things with Ibly, where you give your opponent Ibly, and as long as you have the Mannequin Cat, you can summon out like a Floodgate card, because Ibly was summoned to their side of the field. So there's just so many different things, and the ceiling for this deck is still incredibly high. Yes, losing the Elf was a devastating hit, but as shown by the numbers, this is still a very viable option for this format. Now, our number 3 deck actually has the same win percentage as Sprite with a 51% win rate, but with more overall plays at a little bit over 10,000, we have Sword Soul. Now, this takes the 3rd spot because it has that higher play count, meaning that it is technically more likely something that you are going to see when you're entering a tournament, whether that be locals, regional, YCS, it doesn't matter. This has the higher representation and therefore takes the higher slot. On screen right now, we have a YCS top 4 Sword Soul list, and honestly, Sword Soul is a deck that personally I've never really put too much respect on, but with this current format and the ability to play so many hand traps, Sword Soul is definitely something to be reckoned with. Now, I, again, don't necessarily respect the Sword Soul strategy. I love the deck. The archetype is really cool. I love the art, but I've just never really thought it was that strong of an option. First off, you lock yourself into Worms, which might not be the end of the world, but then you lose out on cards like Baron, and you're just forced to play cards that otherwise aren't necessarily as strong as they could be. Now, one of the really cool things for this deck and why I think it's seeing a resurgence is the Tenyi Spirit Vishuda. Now, Vishuda is able to bounce a card by banishing it, and you can banish it from your grave or your hand as long as you control a normal monster. So this is a really good out to cards like Shangri-Era or Arise Heart, because you are able to just get rid of them by banishing it from your hand, and I think that is one of the strong suits of this deck, as well as, like I said, the ability to just play a ton of hand traps. So I really don't have too much to say about Sword Soul, but the numbers don't lie, so that is our number 3 deck. Coming in at number 2 is a deck that I personally would have placed much, much lower. In fact, when I was doing my personal list based on my opinion of the format, it was number 5, and I know that is going to make a lot of people angry, so all I ask is that you hear me out before you go and rage in the comments. That is going to be Branded Despia. Now, the reason I personally had Branded Despia so low was because I just can't respect a deck that gets FTK'd by Ash Blossom. Ash Blossom is one of, if not the most generic hand trap, and because of that, it is pretty much always seeing play. There's never really been a format where Ash was bad. There have definitely been formats where Ash wasn't as good as it has been in other formats, but pretty much in every single format since, I believe, 2017 when Ash was released, it has been seeing competitive meta play. And because of that and how horribly this deck loses when you do something like Ash their copy of Branded Fusion, I just can't respect that this deck is as high as it is. But with over 16,000 plays and a 53% win rate, it does take the second slot, so you have to take that with a grain of salt. The build that you're seeing on screen, it's probably been on screen for a while now, is the second place YCS build. I believe it was piloted by Charlie Futch, as well as one of his other teammates, John, I'm sorry, I forgot his last name, but their builds were pretty much the same, and I can understand why this deck is so strong. I just can't respect it when it's so easy to stop. It's not just the Ash on the Branded Fusion. There are so many different things that you can do to this deck that just completely stop them dead in their tracks, and if you watch the feature match for the finals, that's exactly what happened. The Branded Fusion got ashed, and he just passed his turn and lost because of it. So I don't know, like, I love this deck, do not get me wrong. The art for this deck, the playstyle of this deck, it is one of my favorite decks of all time. I just don't think that it's as good as people want it to be, so I think that the 53% win rate is solely attributed to the number of plays that it has. If you've got, you know, a wildly ridiculous high number of plays, you're bound to see it win. And this has, what was it? It was like 6,000 more plays than the third deck. So I just think that most of this is attributed to the number of plays. Again, if you like this deck, I understand. I like it as well. I think it's a really cool deck. I just can't respect it because of how easily it is stopped. Now, before we get into the number 1 pick, which I'm sure you guys already know what it is, I do have an honorable mention because this is a deck that I was going to put on my personal list, but when I was looking at the data, it wasn't even a top 5 contender. It wasn't even a top 6 contender. It wasn't until 7th place that this deck was made apparent, and that is going to be Labyrinth. Now, I'm sure you've seen a lot of Labyrinth lately. It is what people are considering to be the best trap deck. Personally, I think Trap Tricks is better, but this was going to be on my list at number 3, and unfortunately, just based on the numbers, it had, I believe, less than half of the overall play count of Trap Tricks, which was at little over 8,000. This had a little over 4,000 plays, and that was a little wild to me because I feel like a lot of people love this deck, especially after Ryan Yu piloted it to 2nd place at the YCS. He did go undefeated himself, just because his team didn't. He still went, I believe it was 13-0, which is an insanely good record for a deck. So I think this deck does deserve some respect, and you definitely need to prepare for it. Even though it's not technically on the top 5 list, it is most certainly an honorable mention, so make sure that you are very well prepared for Labyrinth. And for the number 1 best meta deck of the March 2023 format, with a little under 18,000 total plays and a 62% win rate, which is almost 10 percentage points higher than our number 2 deck, that is going to be Kashtira. Now, on screen is the 1st place Las Vegas YCS Kashtira deck, piloted by Dominic Couch, and you can see why this deck is so strong. Now, a lot of people like this deck because it blocks out zones. A lot of people think that the correct way to play this deck is very similar similar to how Zodiac played, where instead of comboing off, you just want to sit on one boss monster, in this case the Arise Heart, being very similar to a card like Zodiac Trident, and then just backing it up with other powerhouse cards like Hand Traps or Book of Eclipse, Book of Moon, Lance, so on and so forth. There are so many different ways that you can pilot this deck. In the finals feature match, we saw Dominic Couch lock out 9 of his opponent's 10 zones, and then we've also seen him just sit on a Arise Heart, so there really is no correct answer. It just depends on what you're against, what you're trying to play through. Obviously, this deck has some weaknesses, mainly things like Nibiru. Nibiru really hurts this deck, so just be careful for that. That is why you'll see in the extra deck people are playing Baron. It's so that you can special summon one of your level 7s, normal summon your Ash Blossom, and go into a Baron to just make sure that you don't lose to a blowout like Nibiru. Personally, I wouldn't have placed this as a number 1 deck. I believe on my list it was number 2, but again, I'm using the actual numbered statistics instead of my personal opinion. So again, 18,000 plays, 62% win rate. Something definitely is going on for Kashtira, and it is a very powerhouse deck. There are multiple builds. Unfortunately, I don't really have any others built for you guys, but you can play in Adventure Engine, because not only does that help you out of Nibiru as well, because you have an Omni Negate, but in a worst case scenario, something like a Wandering Griffin Rider is a level 7, so this is another one of those decks that seems to be following the theme of today's top 5, where pretty much every single deck has multiple variants that you can play, and I think that's what makes it such a wide and diverse format, because even though you have 5 decks that are a cut above the rest, you never know what variant you are going to play. But Kashtira is definitely the top deck based on those numbers, again, with almost 10 whole percentage points above our number 2 deck is in our win rate category. That solidifies it as the number 1 pick for this format. And there you guys have it. That is going to be the top 5 best meta decks for the March 2023 format. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, you know the deal. Make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, like, comment, share with your friends, maybe consider supporting me on Patreon. I want to hear what your guys' opinions are. Do you like when I use the statistics and the numbers, or would you rather hear my opinion on what is the best deck? Make sure you comment down below, as well as tell me what your pick for the top 5 would be if they differ from mine. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.